I am your speaker, Kojo Idrissa. You may recall me from yesterday's presentation about spreadsheets in Python. And if so, if you came to a presentation on spreadsheets in Python and on D&D, you're a tremendous nerd. Not as much of a nerd as I am, because I've actually given these talks. I'm actually the person who sat down and thought, I'll tell people about this, and it'll be fantastic. I also brought this book with me, the D&D Player's Handbook, so I might need help. So the purpose of this talk, as the title says, is a D&D-based guide to contribution and inclusion in the Python community. It was originally going to be 2 shorter talks, but it really ended up being 2 different sides of the same coin. So we're going to look at how you can contribute to the Python community, but also how the Python community can be more inclusive, and we'll use D&D Dungeons & Dragons as a lens, and I'll probably just be saying D&D from now on. I'm Kojo, I'm a rogue Pythonista. I'm not one of the few people here who's not a professional developer. I am paid to be an accountant, but I do some programming on the side, and the people at work may or may not know that that's what I'm doing, but it's getting things done faster, so there you go. The word rogue will come up later. And then also, I've been a college instructor, and I've got an MBA, and so that's all exciting. No, not really. And that is me on the Twitters. If you want to get in touch with me, I left that out of my slide yesterday, so if you have questions or comments or complaints or whatever, then that's an easy way to find me on the internets. All right, so the main point here we're looking at, and this is a quote from the D&D downloadable rules. Every character is different with various strengths and weaknesses, so the best party of adventurers is one in which the characters complement each other and cover the weaknesses of their companions. The adventurers must cooperate to successfully complete the adventure. So you've got different types of characters with different strengths, weaknesses, different abilities, and without that combination, you will get what is called a TPK in Dungeons & Dragons terminology, total party kill. This means everyone dies. Like Lost, but not for 7 seasons. So a quick primer, because we had a bunch of people who hadn't played before. D&D is essentially based on Lord of the Rings, which many of you have seen, or if you played Warcraft or World of Warcraft, not too dissimilar. You've got different classes, which are essentially professions. The fighter, which is essentially a knight in armor with a big sword or weapons. A wizard, the original term was magic user. I'm cranky old school guy. Somebody who casts spells. A rogue, which used to be called a thief. This is someone who is sneaky and has lots of skills. That's the person who finds that there's a trap on a door and disarms the trap so when you walk through the door, you don't get shot with arrows or hit with fireball. Very important. They're also very good at stabbing people in vital spots and doing lots of damage with one attack. Clerics are people who use what is called divine magic, and they are generally involved in healing and supporting your party, as well as doing some actual fighting. So in the 4th edition of the rules, we're currently on the 5th edition. In the 4th edition rules, they added what are called specific roles to sort of describe what these different characters would be doing. There's a defender role. This is generally like the big tank type person who absorbs damage for you and your friends so you don't have to. A controller, this is someone who's able to control wide areas. So if you're fighting 100 goblins, you're a big tough person, might only be able to fight 1 goblin at a time. The controller is able to maybe lay down some sort of spell that covers a wide area. The striker is a person who excels at doing lots of damage to 1 target at a time, like the rogue we talked about before. And the leader is someone who supports the rest of the party. Is the word leader, is it visible on the screen? Okay, just checking. And so those roles basically line up with the classes that we saw before. The classes here, there are many more classes. These are the 4 archetype classes of Dungeons & Dragons, 4 core classes, and the 4 core roles. And that's why I'm pointing those out. The idea being that you need all of those for your party to be successful and to survive. If you're going to go into a titular dungeon and face a titular dragon, you need all of these people or everybody dies. So if you've got all fighters or all wizards, it's not going to work. All right, so I think I might skip through this slide because partially because I don't want to get crazy on time, but I was going to basically sort of describe a mini Dungeons & Dragons adventure, but it seems like most of you have played D&D or something like it enough such that that's not a concern. So I just sort of, so this is sort of what a very quickly summarized D&D adventure. So I'm going to skip past this. And we're going to look at the different roles. And the point of this talk is the first half of the talk is on contributing to the Python community. So when we think about making contributions to the Python community, often what is thought of is programming skill. And so, well, I can't contribute to Python because I'm not like a wicked elite coder. I can't, write the super magical codes or whatever, so I can't make a contribution. The reality is the Python community is large, and there are lots of different things that people can do within the community. There are lots of different ways to make contributions to the Python community. And so I've listed out some different roles that I think are helpful. It's not an exhaustive list. There are always more ways to contribute, but I'm sort of using the D&D lens to take a look at that. So what are some roles? One role is a Python wizard superstar. And so this is one of the first ways we think of, most people tend to think of when you're contributing to a technology community. This is the super hardcore coder. And so if you are, someone who wants to be a wizard superstar, how do you do that? How do you go about becoming an all-star coder? Well, first, you need to code. You can't get around that. But you start with basic code. Don't worry about writing advanced code at the beginning. You start with basic code, then you write more code. And so the first code you write when you're first learning, if you took, say, the Python 101 tutorial this weekend, or if you're just learning Python on your own, maybe you'll start with some basic scripts, and it'll be basic procedural programming, nothing super fancy. But then, as you write more code, you'll start to develop functions of your own. And your code might start to become more modular. So you start to have separate modules of code so that you can start to reuse your code in certain ways or separate some of your functions out. Instead of having all of your code be one giant file, you can separate it into different functions, or even within one giant file, instead of having just a mass of code, you'll have different functions and you can call them and do things with them. That lets you reuse them, and it helps you start to think about software architecture. More code. So what do you do after that? Well, if you're someone who hasn't studied computer science formally, then you might want to start looking at some information on data structures and algorithms. Because this is an important part of programming, basically how you structure the data you're going to work with and what steps you're going to go through to process that data. And again, and some of this comes from my perspective, as I am not a computer science graduate or major or minor. But if you're trying to sort of enhance your skills and focusing on just being like an all-star super wizard coder, these would be useful steps to go through. And then the next step would be, of course, so again, this link is to a video that you can find on PyVideo. I believe it's from maybe PyCon 2014. The video is Computer Science Fundamentals for Self-Taught Programmers. And so in the Python community, because Python is so accessible, we have a certain number of programmers who are self-taught. But then there are certain computer science fundamentals that may be useful. So this video talks about computer science fundamentals that are useful to self-taught programmers. Then, after more code, you write wicked code. So maybe you get into object orientation, object-oriented code, or object-oriented analysis and design. So you're taking on a new paradigm, enhancing your skills even more. After the wicked code, you read other people's code. And so this gives you an opportunity to take a look at the work of people who are more accomplished programmers than you are, and read their code, learn from it, see what they've done, look at what are best practices, things of that nature. I had to find a way to include this. This is another PyCon video, Castle Anthrax Dungeon Generation Technique. So this is another talk where someone is talking about how they've written code to generate random dungeon levels in games. And so, of course, with the talk with D&D in the title, I had to include that. But that's an example of one of the things you can do. And then the leak code. After the more code and the wiki code, and you read other people's code, then you move on to the leak code. These are all very technical terms. I'm hoping I'm not losing anyone with these. So you might want to learn a new programming paradigm. And so most people start with procedural programming. Python supports object orientation, of course. Everything's an object in Python. But then you might want to move on to something like functional programming and see how that programming paradigm compares to what you've done before. And so if you're wanting to become sort of the Python wizard superstar, these are some useful steps that you could follow. And here you sort of see this compared to the wizard class that we saw in D&D. But again, this is often the most common way people think of contributing to the Python community. But it's not the only way. So what are some other ways? You can become a Python luminary. And you might think to yourself, well, what is the Python luminary, Kojo? I'm glad you asked. A Python luminary is someone who is well known within the Python community. And of course, a wizard superstar could be a luminary, but there are other ways to do that as well. So when we talked about the cleric class before, or the leader role, the Python luminary sort of falls into this category where they're sort of helping to support the community, and they are known in the community, and they spend most of their time speaking to the community. So these are people these are like the famous presentations that you'll see, the well-known keynote speakers, that sort of person. But they spend most of their time speaking to the community, and that distinction becomes important a little later. So how does one go about doing that? Well, part of it involves coding. So it's difficult to talk to the Python community about Python without knowing at least a little bit of Python. So there's a certain amount of coding that is involved. But then a lot of this comes down to you giving presentations. So here, as a Python luminary, your coding can be more focused. You don't have to code everything all the time. Perhaps you've got a specific area that you focus in. But I think what separates the Python luminary from the wizard is that the luminary is someone who is more comfortable communicating what they've done or the results of what they've worked on or what they've learned with the rest of the community, sharing that information with the community. So you start presenting locally. So if you've got a local Python meetup, you present there. So I'm from Houston, and so we have 3 meetups. We are sort of lucky and greedy. We've got a regular Python Houston meetup, a Python web meetup, and then we've got PyLadies. The Houston chapter of PyLadies is there. But in other cities, wherever you are, you've got your own local Python community. So you can start to present within your community. So if you haven't done that yet, then that's something to consider if you like to follow the path of being a Python luminary. Then you start to present regionally. So things like this, like PyTexas. So once you've sort of gotten comfortable presenting in front of your peers, your local peers, then maybe you move on to present at a larger conference, at a regional conference, instead of just a local meetup. So PyTexas. PyArkansas, I'm not sure if it's still around. Their website hasn't been active for a couple of years, but I recall that prior PyTexas, there was always someone from PyArkansas here, or the different state Python meetups, things of that nature. And then present nationally. So you're looking at the PyCons and things of that nature, and then present globally. So it's a process that happens. But if you're someone who thinks, okay, well, maybe I'll never be the greatest of the super duper programmers, but you've got this particular area that you're focusing on, and you enjoy actually sharing those results with other people, this is a way that you can make a contribution to the community. Because something like this, like a PyTexas, and not that I'm so wonderful, but without all these other presenters, we don't have a PyTexas. If it was just like me and Glenn, then nobody wants to come see that. So having the different presenters is very important. People who are willing to put on presentations and share their information with folks is an important contribution to the community. And then, of course, profit. So there you go. Now that you become Python luminary, there's profit. There's no profit. I can't promise profit. All right, so now what about a Python evangelist? And so the Python evangelist role, you'll see this is similar to the Python luminary, but like bards. Bards are another class in Dungeons & Dragons that I didn't really talk about. They're not one of the core classes. But these are people who, they're similar to the luminary, but they speak outside of the community, but on behalf of the community. So these are people who are talking about Python, but to people who aren't already in the Python community. So a lot of the focus here is on how to use Python to solve problems in a particular domain. So if you are, say, I'm going to pick up my friend Walker because he's there. So Walker works in bioinformatics, and so they use Python there for all sorts of various data things. There are a wide range of problems that Python is well suited for. So if you are someone who is working in a domain where you think that there's some uses for Python, you can start to evangelize Python, and more specifically, how it can be a useful solution in your domain. And so this contributes to the Python community by helping to grow it and helping to make it larger. These are also really, Python evangelists, these are the people who help create new Python jobs. And so just let that sink in for a moment. Would you like to be paid money for your Python? The new Python jobs often come from these evangelists because they're sort of out in these different fields pointing out how Python can help, can be useful, can be beneficial. So if you're going to be a Python evangelist, it's important to learn to speak in terms that your target audience is going to understand. So since you're not going to be talking to just programmers, you can't just talk in terms that other Python coders or other programmers are going to understand. You need to be able to communicate the benefits of Python and maybe the benefits of programming in general to the audience you're talking about. I know for myself, and this is something I struggle with when I'm in my working situation, working as an accountant. I'm the only programmer that I deal with at work, and no one else is. And so there's a certain amount of effort required to explain, okay, well, here's how and why this is useful. But it can definitely help grow the Python community and create more opportunities for all of us. How to be a Python educator. So again, this is another role, slightly different, similar to the Evangelist or Luminary, but instead of talking to the community about Python or talking to people outside of the community about the benefits of Python, here you're talking to the community with the focus of enhancing the skills of the members of the community. So again, similar but with a slightly different focus, increasing other people's skills or introducing them to new options to do things that they've already been doing. Maybe they can do them better, maybe they can do them faster, maybe there's a more advanced technique that they haven't been exposed to. So how do you contribute to Python if you have minimal coding skills? Again, with Python being an accessible language, there are often new people who are drawn into the Python community, and they're excited about it, and they like the fact that it's accessible to them. But when you first get started, you're not going to know a lot of Python. That's just how that is. That's the nature of being new to something. So what are some ways that you can contribute? If you're excited and you want to contribute to Python, but you're not a great coder, what do you do? What are some options? Docs or documentation. So documentation is always needed. It can always be improved. There are some projects that don't have any documentation. And as someone who doesn't have a lot of coding skills and may be new to Python, you may be the perfect person to take a look at the documentation, because the documentation is most important for people who are newer to Python. If you've been in the community for a long time, you're familiar with the different conventions, then there are certain things you might be able to figure out, or you may already have enough friends and connections within the community such that you can get your questions answered. But if you're new to the community, then the documentation becomes very, very important. And so someone who is new will have a fresher set of eyes to take a look at that. Translation. So Python is used all over the world, and we have documentation and various other things that need to exist in other languages. So if you've got language skills, but maybe not Python language skills, but actually human language skills, this may be useful, because these things often need to be translated either from English into another language, or maybe there's documentation, a package got started, a library got started, was created by someone from outside the US or not from a non-English speaking country. If you speak that language, you can help translate their documentation into English. So there's another way you can make a contribution. Again, you can evangelize. So even if you're not an expert programmer, and I sort of find myself in this category, I am by no means an expert programmer, but I found some ways that Python can drastically reduce the time of certain tasks, things of that nature, and so you can share that with people. I'm not the best at this, but it's something I continue to work on. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and it's not intended to be. It's just really sort of a beginning. The idea of this is to sort of hopefully to get you thinking about ways that you can actually make a contribution to the Python community, even if you're not someone who is, say, working on the core Python language, or if you're not, I heard a lot yesterday about the requests module. If you're not someone who's written a module that is ultra popular and used by everyone, there are still ways you can make contributions to the Python community. It's just a matter, I think, of thinking about it and trying to find those ways. You can multi-class. So for those of you who may or may not be familiar with the specifics of Dungeons & Dragons, we saw those different classes before: the fighter, the wizard, the rogue. Each of those is a class. There is an option in the D&D rules to multi-class. So let's say you've been a fighter for 2 or 3 levels and you've gotten good at it, but you find yourself like needing to sneak around a little bit more. And so maybe you take a level of rogue, so you get better at sneaking around or better at disarming traps or things of that nature. So it's the same with contributing to Python. you might see yourself as primarily a luminary type or someone who gives presentations, but maybe you do some evangelizing as well. Or maybe you're primarily an evangelist, talking to other people about how Python can be beneficial, but you take on a little bit of educator, or you do some translation because you've got the language skills. So those are things to think about. But there are a lot of different ways to contribute to Python, lots of different skills that are necessary. So don't think that there's just one skill set that's necessary. So how do we go about building a strong party? How do we go about making sure that we've got all these different people to make all these different contributions? And so this sort of shifts into the second half of the talk. So you've established that you've got these different roles that are needed. There are different types of people that are required. And so if you need different types of people, you can't have a homogeneous community. You've got to be able to draw in different types of people. And I'm going to take a look here at the differences between diversity versus inclusion versus political correctness. And I'm focusing on inclusion here for certain specific actual functional reasons, and we'll get into those as we go forward. But the primary focus is on making sure that we have the people in the Python community who can make the contributions that are necessary to help advance the community, help grow the community. So the differences between diversity versus inclusion versus political correctness. Diversity here from a people standpoint just means lots of different types of people. And that in and of itself isn't a problem, but it's also not necessarily a solution. So just more women in the Python community is not in and of itself a solution to anything. Just more black people or more transgender people isn't in and of itself a solution to the problem. And I'm mentioning political correctness here because sometimes these terms get sort of lumped together. And so I'm not a big fan of political correctness. My view on political correctness is, I'm a person, I hate this set of people, but I've been told I can't say I hate this set of people, so now I have to find a friendlier word to use to describe this set of people that I hate. And so, and so I don't know that that's actually helping things a lot. You still hate those people for whatever irrational reason, whatever reason. Maybe you hate Vietnamese people because they killed your grandfather in World War II, but in fact they didn't, because that just didn't happen. So political correctness, not terribly useful, but when you talk about diversity and inclusion, sometimes that gets drawn into the conversation. My focus is on inclusion. Inclusion is a situation where you're welcoming to all people who wish to peacefully coexist. So if these people wish to be a part of your community and coexist with you, then you are welcoming to those people. I see that my friend Claude is here. Claude is a sociology professor. I'm sure there is a more technical definition of inclusion, but I'm not terribly concerned with that. So this is sort of my view on these topics. So again, as I said before, Python doesn't need more of X type of people. Python needs more people who can and will support Python and the community, but those people come in all different shapes and sizes. And so inclusion is important to make sure that as those people arrive or get exposed to our community, they're not being pushed away. They're not being, they're not being given subtle signals that they're not welcome. There's more academic discussion of diversity versus inclusion here at this, there's an academic paper written on the topic, just for those of you who may be interested. And so there's certain inherent limits on our community. And so as inclusive as we'd like to be, as open as we'd like to be, there are certain inherent limits to the Python community that exist, and really to almost any technical community. I'm a member of TXRX Labs, which is a hackerspace in Houston. We face the same issues. There are certain inherent limits that exist in any sort of technical community. One being that programming is hard. That's just sort of a reality. If you're going to do something more than writing 2 or 3 lines or 5 or 10 lines of code, it is a difficult thing in and of itself. It's inherently difficult. It requires a certain amount of rigor, and some people just don't want to do that. And so if you look at the entire population, you then shrink down to a subset of people who are willing to do this hard thing. So there are some people who are automatically cut out because they're not willing to do this thing that is either, well, it is in fact actually hard, but some people may perceive it to be more difficult than it is. And then after that, you've got a lot of people you've got more people who think, I wish I could program, or, programming, that'd be cool. I keep hearing about, that some people made Angry Birds, made a whole bunch of money, so I want to do that, or I want to Twitter my Facebook and, social media my synergies and get some VC funding. And so it sounds fantastic. Programming sounds like a great thing, right? But Mark Zuckerberg did it, and he's got like $1 jillion, and he's got like a magical pony. So, but lots of people think it's a great idea, but there are more people who think it would be cool than who will actually say, you know what, I'm going to spend some time, I'm going to take 30 minutes a day or an hour a day and actually sit down and learn to write code and go through that process. And so, again, that group of people who might be willing to contribute to our community shrinks because they're not going to go through that extra bit of rigor. Let's see. And so, with these limits in mind, there's a naturally smaller subset of people that we can choose from. And the trick is to not, when those people arrive, because it's already a small group, we don't want to push them away. We want to be as inclusive, as welcoming to those people as possible. And so there's some things here from the Zen of Python that I found. Is everyone well familiar with the Zen of Python? If you open your Python interpreter and type import this, then you get a set of steps, a set of ideas, sort of guidelines, philosophical guidelines about Python. I've highlighted some of them here. One, explicit is better than implicit. Error should never pass silently. Now is better than never. And then, although never is often better than right now. So, and I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail going forward. But there are some things here in the Zen of Python that I think shed some light on inclusiveness and how we can go about it. So, how to be inclusive. So there's one thing to say, oh, be inclusive, it's good. But that's not helpful. That's not terribly practical. So what are some things that you can do to be inclusive? Again, this isn't an exhaustive list. These are ideas that I have that I think are useful. One, check your assumptions. And so, and my friend Walker is here. I've written some code, actually code that I'd written for the spreadsheet presentation that I gave yesterday. And I was running the code had been running fine. Then I got to a point where it broke in the middle, and I didn't know why. And I was talking to Walker about it, getting his help with it. And what he said to me is, you've made an assumption somewhere that you didn't realize you'd made. And what the assumption I'd made was that a list that was going to come in would always have values in it. There would never be an empty list. But when we're looking at being inclusive and inclusiveness, there are often assumptions that we have made that we're not really aware that we made. We just say, oh, well, this is just how this is. This type of person doesn't like math or doesn't like science or isn't good at this, or these people just don't want to do this sort of thing. That's why they're here. And so, is that actually true? Or is that just sort of an underlying assumption that you've made and that you're working on? So when you're thinking to try to be more inclusive, think about your assumptions, check your assumptions, and examine them a little more closely. And again, the important this on inclusiveness, we just saw that on the last screen. Errors passing silently. This is important. So the Zen of Python tells us that errors should not pass silently. And when we're looking at inclusiveness in our community or lack thereof, that's exactly what happens. The errors pass silently. If someone comes to your local Python meetup and they hear something that they find offensive, or they are made to feel uncomfortable in some way, shape, or form, they're not going to file a bug request about it. They're not going to write you a note. They're not going to, most people aren't going to stand up and make a big fuss. They'll just go away. And you just won't see those people again. And you won't know why. The errors will pass silently. And that's a problem, because people get exposed to the community. And please understand, I'm not saying that this is a big problem that I've seen in the Python community. I've seen it more in other technical communities, honestly. But I'm sure it happens with us as well, because the errors pass silently. I've been in a number of situations where you'll have a meetup of some sort, and a person will show up for the first time, and they don't come back. And you're not really sure why. Maybe it's because programming was hard. Maybe it's because of a scheduling thing. But this is an important thing to sort of to be aware of, and it's something that I think it's important for all the members of the community to be aware of, because maybe you don't see something, but someone else does, and then that person goes away and we never see them again and we lose a potential contributor. So that's sort of an issue. Don't let the judge pass silently. Practicality beats purity, and that's one of the reasons that I'm talking about this. You can be very, very puritanical and very ideological about inclusiveness and things of this nature. But the reality is you have to, without real practical steps, like, well, what can I do? What can we do to help improve this? Nothing actually gets done. All the ideology in the world doesn't actually do anything. Action is required. So this requires members of your local community to be a little more vigilant, to be aware of these things, to recognize, hey, you know what? I might have some assumptions that I'm not aware that I've made. So let me try to reflect on that and just sort of try to be aware of what's happening in my local community. In the face of ambiguity, refuse the temptation to guess. If you encounter someone who is different from you in some way, if you're sort of not sure about that, if you're curious as to sort of what's going on with that person, try to find some way to interact with them that is respectful and comfortable without you just sort of making a guess. Like I was in a cooking class last Tuesday, and my name is, as you saw, Kojo, K-O-J-O. I had a name tag on, and after about 30 minutes, this woman was like, this is an older woman. She's like, I'm going to guess that you're not from this country. And I was like, yes, I am. She's like, oh, well, where were you born? Washington, D.C., the actual capital of the country. So I'm a second-generation native of that city, actually. And so she's like, oh. And then she was just sort of confused. So it's like, well, you know, where do I go from here? So again, if you're not sure about someone, you know, maybe a better question might have been, oh, that's an interesting name. Where is it from? Or something along those lines. But don't just, in the face of ambiguity, resist the temptation to guess. Don't just, you know, try leaping to conclusions. Now is better than never. And so when we're talking about, okay, what are the things I can do to be more inclusive? Don't wait until you have, like, you know, don't go and, like, oh, I have to go read all 5 inclusiveness books and, you know, and go back to college and get a minor in inclusivity. No, just try to be more inclusive, like now, like today. Just, you know, try that. So because now is better than never, make an effort there. Although never is often better than right now. So don't just, like, leave this talk and then run out and grab somebody that looks strange and be like, hey, come on, you're included, because that's creepy. Just please don't be creepy. But, you know, it's something that you can begin to think about immediately and start thinking about, okay, well, what can I do? How can I take some sort of action based on your background, your own personal situation? Learning to interact with people outside of your immediate sphere. This is very important because a lot of us, especially as Pythonistas and as programmers, we tend to be somewhat socially insular. We tend to sort of hang around with, you know, with other nerd types like ourselves, you know, other people who carry around D&D books, or talk about spreadsheets, or that sort of thing. So, you know, so learn to interact with people who are different from you, who do different things from you. If you're not an athletic person, maybe, you know, talk to some athletic people, hang out with some athletic people that you might know. Or if you are like a jock, I like to do the exercises, well, then talk to some nerdy people. You know, or things of that nature. You know, if across, you know, try to move across your own personal, ethnic, or sexual orientation boundaries and just deal with people who are outside of your immediate sphere. And it makes it a lot easier to interact with different types of people and to be more inclusive. Again, don't just talk to other coders. You can't spend all your time talking to programmers. Because, I mean, you could literally just sit at home with your laptop in IRC all day, just talking to other coders. That's not helping. So please leave your homes. So, and again, from a practical standpoint, again, practicality beats purity. From a practical standpoint, my effort to try to make a contribution to the Python community is to help grow it. Non-programmers are the largest growth vector for Python. If we're going to grow the Python community, it's going to be easier to do that by bringing non-programmers into the Python community than trying to convert those Java devils, because they're devils. No, they're not. Exactly. So, but yeah, so talking to other non-programmers, because that's where a lot of the growth opportunities are. But again, that comes back to talking to people who aren't like you or interacting with people who aren't like you, because the non-programmers won't understand some of the things that are just sort of naturally held assumptions for you as a programmer. And again, the Python language is great for introducing non-programmers to programming, but you won't be able to introduce it to them if you don't talk to them. So this is an interesting point. There was a talk I was listening to from EuroPython. Anna Ravenscroft, about 50 minutes in, she suggests that you bring someone who is not like you to the next, she was at EuroPython, so to the next EuroPython. So that's something to consider. At your local Python meetup or what have you, try to invite someone who is not like you to your local meetup and expose them to Python. So there's an actual practical tip that you can try. Don't just grab somebody off the street or whatever. It should be someone that you know and you're comfortable with. Don't kidnap people, because that's not good. Ignore legal requirements. And so this is here because when discussions about, that sounds, as I read it now out loud, I'm like, that sounds terrible. That's not, that is, yeah, exactly. Don't kidnap people. And the reason this bullet point is here is because when discussions of inclusivity and that sort of thing come up, people often feel like, oh, well, I guess we have to do this because we're a nonprofit and so we need to meet some sort of requirements to get government funding or blah, blah, blah. Well, no, don't try to be inclusive because you're trying to get grant money, or because you're trying to meet some sort of, requirement or what have you. The point of being inclusive is to maximize the number of awesome people who are in our community and who are making contributions to our community. So don't worry about trying to, Title IX or what have you. Just absorb all the awesome people. So don't worry about the legal requirements. And another issue with that is when you're focusing on the legal requirements, people feel like, I guess I have to do this because this is the law and I hate it. Well, no, don't worry about that sort of stuff, because no one wants to feel forced and to feel uncomfortable. And again, considering the feelings of others, this gets back to learning to interact with people outside of your immediate sphere. There is something that might not make you uncomfortable, but it might make other people around you uncomfortable. It's a matter of being a little more empathetic. And so this also makes it easier to be more inclusive because, again, we've got different types of people. Folks respond to things in different ways. And again, these have been some steps to help you, some ideas about how you can help practice inclusivity in your local Python community. So when you go back home to your home cities, these are some things to think about. And again, having a wider range of people at your local Python events, just trying to bring in people who aren't like you, that sort of thing. And it helps to grow the community because it exposes the language to other people. So now this, I thought this might be a problem, but I also thought it was important to mention. What if you can't? What if you just feel like, you know what? I'm not talking to those weird people. Look, I do my thing. I do what I do. I do it with people like me. I'm not comfortable getting outside the box. The truth is, like, if your heart's not really in it, if it's just too difficult for you, you should probably just leave it alone and just be around people who are just like you, because there are few things worse than someone like, I guess I'll talk to a girl programmer. Oh God, if I'm going to take that approach to dealing with a female programmer, she'd probably rather I just left her alone, And so if it's just something that you feel is really too difficult for you, then just leave it alone. But I think realistically, you'll have to understand that that's sort of a self-isolating behavior, and over time, you will be self-selecting into this smaller and smaller group. But it's something that I thought should be mentioned. And so, for final words here, and this was something from this talk. Let's see, where is that link? But this was a quote that I thought was interesting. Just as systems tend towards entropy, if you leave a community alone, it tends towards toxicity. Good communities require continual effort. And so if we want our community to be a good community, we can't just be like, okay, it's fine now. I'll just go back to minding my own business. It requires continual effort from all of us. And this goes for groups and communities, but it also goes for us as individuals. And I mean, and for me. And so this is something, I've given this talk on inclusivity and contributions because it's something that I'm working on within myself, on being more inclusive and making more contributions. So it's just sort of it's something that requires ongoing vigilance and effort. And that's all I've got. We've got about, 10 minutes, 8 minutes for questions and or comments. Or if you don't want to ask a question or a comment here, then you can tweet at me because the internet is everywhere. So, any questions, comments, ideas, feedback? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh. I'm next. There's this wonderful PSF marketing literature now. It's brand new.
Uh-oh.
You can get them for free, hand them out to your friends.
Oh, okay.
There you go, like that. I haven't actually figured out who, because this guy doesn't need it, right? He's kind of sold. But take a look at it. It's kind of slick. PSF made it. Yay for the PSF.
Yay, PSF. Woo! This young woman had a question? I have not in a while. I used to, but I'm thinking about it. But this is sort of the time constraint issue. I'm sorry. The question was, do I DM? And for those who are not familiar, in a Dungeons & Dragons game, there is a DM or a dungeon master. This is the person who runs the adventure. And so if you are playing, then you know, let's say you're a fighter and you're a magic user and you're a rogue, and I'm the one who's telling you what you all are doing. I'm describing the adventure and telling you what goes on and who you're fighting. So I have DM'd in the past. I have not done so recently. There's the whole time constraint thing, but we'll see.
So, what did you use for maps?
What did I use for map? Oh, it's been a long time since I DM'd because I'm lazy and DMing requires more work. Usually graph paper.
You used graph.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, but I used the graph paper because I wasn't artistic, so.
Yeah, we took a rubber mat that was a chessboard and took it and put it in like a picture frame and just draw it with permanent marker. We find that that's very, you can erase it very easily. Yeah, dry. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, we find that that's really useful because you can erase it. I mean, when you're through a particular dungeon, you can erase it as you move around. Very, very modular.
We actually use a very, very heavy, clear tablecloth because that's really strong tape.
Actually, you could use this. Will you take a look on the screen? Yeah, so that's one option.
There's a few places online where you can download full modules and stuff too.
Yeah, I saw that. I was working for a couple of I'm thinking about just switching to the projector at this point. Projector down all the table.
You gotta make the players make their own map that way when they screw it up.
Get players to do anything. I cannot get players to do anything like
And so now we've gotten to the point where you find out that oftentimes Dungeons & Dragons is about your dungeon master trying to kill you. So, so this is all the more reason why it's important to have a strong party, because your DM is often trying to kill you at every turn. So. Any other questions? D&D related or non-D&D related? Or I thought about getting some dice to bring, but I have no dice. Walker.
So one of the this is so sad. Some of the people that are often most overlooked and valuable to the open source community are the complete non-coders. So these are people that can do graphics or documentation. Or even just those who submit bugs, but it's the graphics ones especially. Like how do, and you didn't actually have that as like one of your roles, or
Well, and so I sort of, so the question was for the people watching at home on video, the question was some of the people who are often overlooked as far as contributing to the community are the non-coders, the people with graphic skills or documentation and that sort of thing. This slide was sort of intended to address that. I didn't address graphic people specifically, but documentation and that sort of thing. There was a comment there, Walker, but was there a question?
How do you go about pulling in artsy people into your open source library project?
Okay, so the fully formed question is, how would you go about pulling in, like, especially graphics people, artsy people, to your open source project? Gentleman back in the saying, did you have a response to that?
I had a question for you. The fact that you didn't include that, does that make you an anti-art hype?
No, it's making me somebody. It's making me somebody who has no art skills whatsoever. But it's an important point. So, in response to Walker's question, how do you go about pulling in the artsy people to your project? Maybe you start looking at what Python can do for them. I think in general, the best way to pull anyone into Python is to focus, someone who's not in the community, to pull them in is to focus on what Python can do for them. So what are some of the different graphic libraries that are available in Python? I think, what is it, Pill in Python 2 and Pillow in Python 3 is one of the first things that comes to mind. And like maybe even like Matplotlib, some of the graphing things for someone who might be trying to do data visualization, that sort of thing. So I would say focus on what Python can do for them, and then they'd be more inclined to be involved in the community because there's an actual benefit. And I'm a fairly pragmatic type. If you show people how something can help them, as opposed to how they can help you, I think people are more willing to be involved in something like that. So. So the conversation in the room has devolved into why would you need artsy people? And some people are saying, yes, I need artsy people, and other people aren't sure they need artsy people. So I will say that as a member of TXRX, which is a hackerspace, it's a fairly industrial space. We have metalworking, woodworking, electronics, all that sorts of stuff. We just opened a new art space so that the industrial fabrication can be combined with artistic pursuits. And so, yes, you need arts people. You might not recognize you need arts people, but you probably do. So, I think are we out of time? Yeah, we're out of time. So, thank you very much for attending. Again, you can find me on the internet, or I'm the tall, bald, handsome man wandering about. So, feel free to stop and ask me questions. Thank you for your time.